The first time I went out alone was almost my last.
I grew up in a very safe, very affluent neighborhood. It was unheard of for anyone to lock their cars or houses, and when someone new moved to the neighborhood, it was mere moments before they were welcomed with open arms and open doors. Despite being surrounded by what could be described as one large neighborhood family, my mom was very particular about house rules being followed, one of which was never going out alone. Walking to a friend's house, 3 of us have to go, so 2 could walk home together after dropping you off. It was rare, but occasionally just 2 of us would be able to sneak out from under her watchful eye and run to the corner store a few blocks down for some candy or soda. One sweltering day during the summer I turned 9, I found myself home alone and restless. I decided to take my sister's cool new 10-speed for a spin around the block a few times. Now, even though I was tall for my age, the bike was still a few inches too big for me. I decided that didn't matter, jumped on, and started pedaling. My first lap around the neighborhood went off without a hitch. Birds were chirping, sun was shining, and the wind blowing through my curled hair felt wonderful. Second lap around the block, I passed an older, unfamiliar car parked on the side of the road, and the sun reflecting off the huge scrape down the side temporarily shocked my vision into bright blue stripes, which I furiously tried to blink away. The third lap, I saw the car pull off the side of the road heading towards me, and a tiny pit of unease began to grow in my stomach as the driver slowed when he passed me. I chalked it up to being scared of getting caught out alone and continued on my way. I picked up speed as I rounded the corner towards my house and decided to go for one more time around the block, but make it quick so I'd beat my mom home and avoid the trouble I knew I'd be in if she caught me out alone. I hit the bottom of the hill next to our house with some speed and started to climb to the top, slowing more and more the closer I got. By the time I reached the top of the hill, I had to stop and catch my breath, teetering the too tall bike at my hip. As I struggled to catch my breath, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My arms locked on the handlebars and every inch of my body froze. I had been caught. I just knew it. I heard a car creeping up behind me and it just had to be my mom. But it wasn't. When relief should have washed over me, the unknown dread only deepened, further stiffening my still frozen limbs. I turned to see the same old car, with the same blinding scratch down the side, slowing down right next to me. The man stopped the car right next to my bike on the wrong side of the street, and through his open driver door started to ask me if I had seen a stray dog running about, because his had come off the leash and run off. I froze. This cliche question is the one they warned us about in school, the one every kidnapper supposedly uses. I decided if I answered him firmly and rode my bike away that he would know his plan wouldn't work on me. Plus, he might just really be looking for his dog. This was my plan. My terrified body betrayed that plan in a trembling "no" is all I could manage. As I fumbled my feet to the pedals of this too big bike, his car door flew open and out he lunged. "No," I said again as I wobbled my way past his open car door, his hand brushing the back of my shirt and knocking my back tire as I pedaled as fast as I could the 50 feet to the next driveway I saw. I pedaled, legs burning, up the drive, running my front tire so hard into the neighbor's front step that it bent the wheel. My body catapulted over the handlebars, and I burst through my neighbor's front door. Edie, 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 help! My neighbor was not home. I ran into the kitchen, still calling in hopes I was wrong. Edie! What are you doing? A man's voice behind me, and I froze, hearing my heartbeat in my eyes, feeling the blood pumping through my veins, knowing that this was it. I slowly turned around, not knowing what else to do, and there stood my neighbor's son, home from college. I dissolved into tears, gulping out what happened. He tossed the bent bike into the back of his truck and drove me around the corner to the safety of my home. My mom was home and had the look of death in her eyes until she saw my tear-streaked face. The police were called. The neighbors were called. The car had been spotted frantically circling the block a few minutes following our encounter, but he was gone by the time police arrived. To this day, 20 years later, I still have a hard time riding my bike alone. I still get chills when cars slow down next to me. I still wonder if the next girl was as lucky as I.
Do you want a lift?
This is hopefully not breaking the rules, as it happens part and parcel between both me and a friend on the same night. Anyway, I'll get into it. This was the late 90s, and me and a friend were over at another friend's house, both around the age of 17 to 18. At around midnight, we both set off home, and we typically walked everywhere. Neither of us drove, so it was really our only option. We walked part of the way back together and then split off in our separate directions. He lived out in the country, and the walk back to his house was a long and pretty vacant one. A long stretch of main road past a cemetery, followed by an almost pitch black walk down a 1-mile road, which led to his village. His house was the second house of the village, so after that trek, he'd be home. After splitting up, it took about 10 minutes before I got a call from him. He said a guy had pulled up next to him in a car and said, "Hey, do you want a lift?" His initial reaction was of confusion. He didn't know this guy, but also, his car was full of kids. 4 kids, ranging from the age of 5 to 14. He said he told him that he was fine, and the guy's face just changed, and he shouted, "Yeah, well, you didn't fucking look like you needed one." At that point, he'd sped off. As he was explaining this, he says, "Oh fuck, he's here again." I immediately turn on heel and start walking back. I partly hear the conversation on the phone. The guy pulls up alongside him and says, "Do you want a fucking lift now?" My friend, again, responds with, "No." Then, possibly the weirdest point, the guy says, "Are you a hermaphrodite?" My friend, confused, just said, "What?" To which the guy responded, "Do you have both male and female organs?" To which my friend simply responded, "No." And then the guy took off in his car again. At this point, I'm racing to catch up with where he'd got to. He was just past the cemetery on the long main road, before he'd got to the point where he'd turn off onto the mile of dark road. On catching up with him, he was visibly freaked out. He said the weirdest part is that the kids in the car just seemed unfazed by it, like this guy just does this kind of thing and they're used to it. They weren't laughing. They weren't even really paying attention. It was all just so bizarre. We started walking together and got to the mile of dark road. It's not a nice place to walk at the best of times, and the previous events just made us both more nervous, but we pressed on. About halfway down the path, we hear a car coming up from behind us. It's the guy again. He's absolutely racing down the road and comes to a screeching halt next to us. Again, he winds the window down. I clock the guy and he looks like the most typical early 30s dad of that time. Bleach blonde Eminem style hair, football top. Basically, you wouldn't have looked twice at him in the street in that particular era. He eyes me up and says, "Who the fuck's this?" Before either of us can say a word, he screams, "Do you want to fucking fight?" And again, before even answering that question, he takes off again, speeding down the road into the village where my friend lives. We now had to walk directly toward where he'd gone, so we sprint it, knowing his house isn't so far away. We rush into his house and stake out his bedroom window, which looks out over the only road leading out of the village. No car left in the hour we sat there. This guy must live in his village, we concluded. I stayed at his that night, and early next morning we went looking for the car. His village is made up of 4 separate cul-de-sacs, and we could see no sign of the vehicle. Whether it was parked in a garage or not, who knows, but it all started to feel like an episode of The Twilight Zone. So, weird, angry, child convoying football hooligan. Let's never meet again.